The stars were quiet that night when the message came through. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat alone in the communications room of Station Delta 7, drinking her third cup of coffee and watching the endless stream of routine signals from across human space. Cargo manifests from Mars, weather reports from the outer colonies. Nothing exciting ever happened on the night shift. Then her screen flashed red. The signal was weak, coming from far outside human territory. Sarah almost ignored it. Her job was to monitor human communications, not chase ghost signals from empty space. But something about the transmission made her pause. It wasn't random static or equipment failure. There was a pattern to it, like someone desperately trying to reach anyone who would listen. She boosted the signal and started recording. What came through changed everything. The E. Being on the screen was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Tall and graceful, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. Its face was gentle, almost childlike, but its eyes held the weight of centuries. When it spoke, its voice was soft and musical, but Sarah could hear the fear underneath. "My name is Elder Thalis of the Althari Collective," the being said. "We are sending this message to anyone who might hear it. We are dying, and we have nowhere else to turn." Sarah leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. The elder continued, his crystal features catching the light as he moved. "For 1,000 years my people have lived in peace. We are healers and teachers. We build things of beauty and spend our lives learning how to help others. We have no armies, no weapons. We never thought we would need them." The image changed, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Where moments before she had seen a crystal palace gleaming in alien sunlight, now she saw ruins. Beautiful spires lay broken and burning. Bodies lined the streets. But these weren't just any bodies. They were Althari, and many of them were small. Children. "The Corac Empire came to our worlds 3 months ago," Elder Thalis said, his voice breaking. "They told us we were now their property. When we tried to explain that we were peaceful people who meant no harm, they laughed." The images got worse. Sarah watched in horror as insect-like creatures with black armor dragged Althari from their homes. The aliens were huge, easily twice the size of a human, with claws and mandibles that looked designed for tearing flesh. They moved with the cold efficiency of predators who had done this many times before. "The Corac do not just conquer," the elder explained. "They enjoy causing pain. They have taken our children and used them for experiments. They force our healers to watch as they torture the patients we spent lifetimes learning to cure. 6 of our colonies are gone. Every day more of our people disappear into their ships." Sarah's hands clenched into fists as she watched footage of Corac soldiers herding Althari children into metal cages. The children were crying, calling for parents who would never come. The elder's image returned, and Sarah could see that he was crying too. Crystal tears rolled down his face like liquid starlight. "We sent messages to the Galactic Council begging for help. They told us they cannot interfere in internal disputes. We contacted the Zen Empire, the Crystalline Federation, even the trade guilds. Everyone says they are sorry, but they cannot risk war with the Corac." The old alien looked directly into the camera, and Sarah felt like he was looking right at her. "This is our final transmission from Velara Prime, our homeworld. The Corac will be here soon. We have no weapons to fight them with. We can only heal and create and love. If there is anyone out there who still believes that innocence deserves protection, if there is anyone who thinks that mercy and kindness should not be crushed by cruelty, please help us." The image flickered, and Sarah could hear explosions in the background. The elder's palace was shaking. "We do not ask you to die for us. We only ask that you remember us. Remember that we tried to make the galaxy a better place. Remember that some of us believed in hope until the very end." The transmission cut to static. Sarah stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then she replayed the message. Then she played it again. She had seen war before. She had grown up hearing stories from her grandfather about the Centauri Rebellion, where humans had fought other humans over mining rights and territory. She knew that the galaxy was a dangerous place where the strong took what they wanted from the weak. But this was different. The Althari weren't soldiers or politicians or criminals. They were healers and teachers and artists. They were parents trying to protect their children. They were everything good about civilization, and monsters were destroying them for sport. Sarah's hands were shaking as she opened a new communication channel. She uploaded the elder's message and added her own note. "Priority transmission to Earth Command. Genocide in progress. Innocents being slaughtered. Request immediate action." She hesitated for a moment, then added one more line. This is unacceptable. The message raced across space, jumping from relay station to relay station, carrying the Elder's plea toward Earth. But Sarah knew it would take time to reach the right people, and time was something the Althari didn't have. She pulled up the galaxy map and looked at the coordinates the Elder had provided. Velara Prime was far from human space, in a region controlled by ancient empires that barely acknowledged humanity's existence. The journey would take weeks even with the fastest ships. By the time any help arrived, would there be anyone left to save? Sarah thought about the children in the cages. She thought about Elder Thalus's crystal tears. She thought about her own little brother Tommy, who was probably asleep in his dorm room at the Naval Academy on Mars, dreaming about his graduation next month. What if it had been human children in those cages? What if it had been Earth burning while aliens laughed at human pleas for help? She opened another channel and began recording her own message. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen at Station Delta 7. I'm sending this to every human military installation, every colony, every ship in space. You need to see this transmission. You need to see what's happening to the Althari. And then you need to ask yourself one question. What kind of people are we if we let this happen? She attached the Elder's message and sent it out on every frequency she could access. Military channels, civilian networks, even the illegal pirate stations that operated in the outer systems. Within hours, every human in the galaxy would know about the Althari. Sarah leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. She had just violated about a dozen regulations by broadcasting classified material without authorization. She would probably be court-martialed. Her career was over. But as she sat there in the quiet communications room surrounded by the gentle hum of machinery and the distant light of stars, she realized she didn't care. Some things were more important than careers. The Elder had asked if anyone still believed that innocence deserved protection. Sarah Chen did, and she was about to find out if the rest of humanity agreed with her. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the Elder's message continued its journey toward Earth. Carrying with it the hopes and fears of a dying people, the Althari had sent out a call for aid. Soon they would learn what it meant when humanity heard that call. The message spread like wildfire across human space. Within 6 hours of Sarah Chen's transmission, the Althari Elder's plea was playing on every news channel from Earth to the farthest mining colonies. Social media exploded with shares and comments. Military bases buzzed with angry conversations. In homes across the galaxy, human families gathered around screens to watch the gentle crystal beings beg for help. The reaction was immediate and universal. Rage. On Earth, President Elena Vasquez was woken at 3 a.m. by her chief of staff. She watched the Elder's message in her pajamas, sitting on the edge of her bed. When it ended, she was quiet for a long moment. How many people have seen this? She asked. Everyone, Madam President. The whole human population. Every colony, every station, every ship. It's everywhere. Vasquez nodded slowly. Good. Schedule an emergency session with the UN Security Council. And get me Admiral Webb on the line. 2 hours later, she stood before the cameras in the Oval Office. Behind her, the flags of United Earth hung motionless in the still air. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with cold fire. My fellow humans, she began. Tonight we learned that there are monsters in the galaxy. We learned that somewhere far from our homes, aliens who have never hurt anyone are being tortured and killed for entertainment. We learned that the so-called civilized powers of the galaxy have decided to look the other way. She paused, letting her words sink in. For years, other species have called us primitives. They say we're too violent, too aggressive, too dangerous for polite galactic society. They're right about one thing. We are dangerous. But they misunderstand what makes us dangerous. The president's voice grew harder. We're not dangerous because we like violence. We're dangerous because we will not tolerate injustice. We're dangerous because we believe that some things are worth fighting for. We're dangerous because when innocents cry out for help, we answer. Around the globe, humans watch their leader with growing approval. Today, we show the galaxy what human violence looks like when it serves justice. Admiral Webb, mobilize the fleet. All available ships, all available personnel. We're going to war. In the orbital shipyards above Luna, Admiral Marcus Webb was already moving. The grizzled veteran had fought in 3 colonial wars and put down 2 pirate uprisings. He had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. But as he watched the footage of Althari children being dragged away in chains, He felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. "Signal all ships," he told his communications officer. "Emergency mobilization. Every vessel that can fly and fight is hereby activated for Operation Righteous Fury." The response overwhelmed the military communication networks. Within hours, hundreds of ships were reporting for duty. Navy destroyers and cruisers formed the backbone of the fleet, but they were joined by colonial defense ships, merchant vessels with improvised weapons, and even private yachts whose owners had welded gun mounts to their hulls. But Webb knew the regular fleet wouldn't be enough. The Corac Empire was vast and powerful, with thousands of ships and billions of soldiers. To win this fight, humanity would need every warrior it could find. He opened a secure channel to the Outer Rim colonies. "This is Admiral Webb to all former military personnel. We have a job that needs doing. It's dangerous, it's probably suicide, and Command can't officially authorize it. Anyone interested in volunteering for an unsanctioned rescue mission should report to Staging Area Zebra immediately." The first to respond was Colonel James Morrison, callsign Reaper. Morrison had been mining asteroids in the Kepler system, working off a sentence for war crimes committed during the Centauri Rebellion. His methods had been too brutal even for the colonial Marines, earning him exile to the Outer Rim. But as Morrison watched the Althari footage on his mining station's small screen, he smiled for the first time in 3 years. The smile was not pleasant. "Control, this is Reaper. Request immediate transport to Staging Area Zebra. I have some work to finish." Similar responses came from across human space. Retired soldiers climbed out of retirement. Veterans working as freight haulers and security guards abandoned their jobs. The legendary Terran Foreign Legion, officially disbanded after their conduct in the Vega campaign, began reforming in secret. Most shocking of all was the response from General Catherine Kozlov, known throughout the military as Iron Kozlov. She had been the youngest general in human history, a tactical genius who had never lost a battle. She had also been quietly forced into retirement after her methods proved too extreme. For the UN Ethics Committee, she emerged from her cabin in the Canadian wilderness carrying a single bag and wearing a uniform that hadn't seen daylight in 5 years. "My government considers me too dangerous to command," she told the news crews that had tracked her down. Perhaps they're right, but there are creatures out there hurting children, and sometimes dangerous is exactly what you need. While the military mobilized, civilian populations across human space reacted with their own form of fury. Protests erupted outside embassies of the galactic powers who had refused to help the Althari. Trade unions announced boycotts of non-human goods. Children sent their allowances to refugee funds that didn't exist yet, but would be needed soon. On Mars, Naval Academy cadet Tommy Chen watched his sister's unauthorized broadcast for the 20th time. He recognized the look in Sarah's eyes. She had worn the same expression when she found out their neighbor was beating his dog. Sarah had always been the one who couldn't walk past suffering without doing something about it. Tommy looked around at his fellow cadets. They were supposed to graduate in a month, then spend 2 years in training assignments before seeing real action. But the galaxy wasn't going to wait for their education to finish. "Anyone else think we're wasting time here?" he asked. 20 minutes later, the entire senior class was marching toward the base commandant's office, demanding immediate deployment to the war zone. Meanwhile, the galactic community watched humanity's mobilization with growing alarm. The other major powers had assumed humans would file a formal protest, maybe impose some trade sanctions. Instead, they were watching the emergence of the largest military fleet in recent galactic history. The Corac Empire received intelligence reports about human fleet movements and dismissed them. Hive Queen Zakara, the supreme ruler of the Corac, watched holographic displays of human ships with amusement. "Let them come," she clicked to her war council. "These primitives think their crude weapons can challenge our might? We have conquered 100 worlds. We have broken empires that ruled before their planet had intelligent life. What can a few human ships do against the swarm?" Her generals agreed with confident chittering. The Corac had fought the major galactic powers before and always emerged victorious. Humans were newcomers, barely past their own planetary wars. Their technology was primitive, their tactics unsophisticated. This would be a minor distraction before returning to the enjoyable work of breaking Althari spirits. But deep in human space, something unprecedented was happening. For the first time in their history, humans were uniting not for conquest or resources or ideology, but for the simple principle that some things could not be allowed to stand. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance, looking out at the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. 800 ships of every size and class, carrying the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Human beings who had decided that justice required violence. All ships report ready for jump, his communications officer announced. Webb nodded. Signal the fleet. Time to show these aliens what happens when you hurt children in front of humans. The fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it the fury of an entire species. Across the galaxy, the Althari huddled in their hiding places, praying to crystal gods for salvation. They had no idea that salvation was already on its way, armed to the teeth and absolutely furious. The Corac picket ships were the first to die. They hung in space around Velara Prime like metal spiders, monitoring communications and preventing anyone from leaving the planet. The insectoid crews were relaxed, confident in their superiority. Nothing could challenge the Corac Empire in their own territory. Then space itself seemed to explode. The attack came from beyond sensor range, a cloud of metal death moving at incredible speed. The humans had taken asteroids, strapped fusion engines to them, and turned them into weapons of mass destruction. No shields could stop that much kinetic energy. No armor could deflect solid rock moving at 10% of light speed. The first wave of kinetic kill vehicles smashed through the Corac fleet like bullets through paper. Massive battleships that had terrorized dozens of worlds simply ceased to exist, vaporized in flashes of light that could be seen from the planet's surface. Admiral Webb watched the destruction from his command ship with grim satisfaction. Second wave, launch boarding pods. All ships, battle formation. Let's introduce ourselves properly. What emerged from hyperspace next defied everything the galaxy knew about warfare. The human fleet wasn't arranged in the neat formations that civilized species used. Instead, it moved like a swarm of angry insects, ships weaving between each other in patterns that should have caused collisions but somehow didn't. The Corac responded with their traditional tactics. Their remaining battleships formed defensive lines, ready to trade shots with the human fleet at long range. Their commanders calculated firing solutions and prepared for an honorable battle between warriors. Instead, they got chaos. Human ships didn't follow the rules of galactic warfare. They didn't announce their intentions or demand surrender. They just attacked with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Destroyers dove straight into the teeth of Corac battle lines. Cruisers used ramming attacks. Fighters swarmed like angry bees, ignoring losses that would have broken any other military force. But the real shock came when the boarding pods launched. The Corac had expected boarding actions, of course. In civilized warfare, elite troops would dock with enemy ships and engage in formal combat with proper rules and honor codes. What they got instead were crude metal cans full of screaming humans wearing armor that looked like it had been forged in hell. Colonel Morrison led the assault on the Corac command ship. His pod smashed through the hull in a shower of sparks and debris. Before the Corac defenders could react, Morrison was already moving, his plasma rifle cutting down enemies with mechanical precision. The Corac soldiers were individually superior fighters. They stood 7 feet tall with natural armor plating and claws that could tear through steel. In single combat, any one of them could probably kill a human, but humans didn't fight fair. Morrison moved through the corridors like death incarnate. When his rifle overheated, he switched to his sidearm. When that ran dry, he drew his combat knife. The Corac had never faced an enemy that would keep fighting even when wounded. Bleeding and outnumbered, behind him came the rest of his squad, humans who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they probably wouldn't survive. They fought with the desperate fury of people who had seen the footage of Althari children and decided that some things were worth dying for. The battle for the command ship lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Morrison stood alone in the bridge, surrounded by dead Corac officers. His armor was cracked, his left arm hung useless at his side, and blood dripped from a dozen wounds. But he was alive, and the enemy was not. "Control, this is Reaper," he said into his comm unit. "Package delivered. Command ship is ours." On the planet's surface, the fighting was even more brutal. The Corac had thought their ground forces were unbeatable. They had conquered dozens of worlds, broken armies that outnumbered them 10 to 1. Their soldiers were killing machines bred for warfare, with weapons and tactics refined over centuries of conquest. They had never fought humans. The first sign that something was wrong came when human drop pods started falling like meteors across the planet. The Corac watched with amusement as the crude metal containers smashed into the ground, many of them catching fire from atmospheric entry. "Fools," clicked Commander Jacques as he watched the landing through his command center's monitors. "They don't even know how to land properly. We'll sweep up their remains before nightfall." Then the pod started opening. What emerged defied all logic. Humans climbed out of wreckage that should have killed them. Some were on fire. Some were missing limbs. Some were clearly dying from their injuries. All of them kept fighting. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos kicked down the door of a Corac experimentation facility just as Commander Jacques was giving his confident assessment. Inside, she found a sight that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. A room full of Althari children strapped to tables, their crystal skin dim with pain and terror. For a moment, Santos forgot her military training. She forgot about tactics and rules of engagement and proper procedure. All she could see were the children's faces looking at her with desperate hope. The Corac guards in the room saw something in her expression that made them step backward. They had tortured thousands of beings across hundreds of worlds, but they had never seen anything like the fury that burned in Santos's eyes. "You touch the kids," she said quietly. The first guard raised his weapon. Santos moved faster than the insectoid creature could track, her rifle sending plasma bolts through its center mass. The second guard tried to run. Santos shot it in the back. The third attempted to grab one of the children as a hostage. That was a mistake. Santos had two brothers back on Earth. She had spent her childhood protecting them from bullies and scraped knees and bad dreams. The protective instinct that drove her to join the military in the first place now focused on the terrified alien children like a laser beam. When the rescue teams arrived an hour later, they found Santos sitting among the freed children, her rifle across her knees and 17 dead Corac around the room. She was teaching the young Althari a human lullaby, her voice gentle despite the blood on her armor. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers fought with a combination of tactical skill and righteous fury that broke Corac morale. They didn't just defeat their enemies. They demolished them with such overwhelming violence that surviving Corac began to question everything they believed about their own superiority. Private Tommy. Chen's moment came when he found an Althari nursery under siege. 50 Corac warriors had the building surrounded, preparing to storm it and capture the children inside for their experiments. Tommy looked at his squad of 12 humans, then at the enemy force that outnumbered them 4-1. The smart tactical decision would be to call for backup and wait for reinforcements. Instead, Tommy thought about his sister Sarah, alone in her communication station, making the choice to send that first message even though it meant ending her career.
He thought about the Althari elders' crystal tears.
He thought about what his parents had taught him about standing up to bullies. "Okay, people," he told his squad. "We've got kids to protect. Let's show these bugs what humans do to child abusers." The battle was hopeless from the beginning, 12 humans against 50 Corac warriors in a defensive position. But Tommy's squad didn't fight to win. They fought to buy time, to protect the children long enough for help to arrive. They made their stand in the nursery doorway, refusing to give ground. When their ammunition ran low, they fought with knives and clubs in their bare hands. When their numbers dwindled, the survivors fought harder. Tommy's last transmission before his comm unit was destroyed came 6 hours into the siege. "Tell my sister the kids are safe." When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Tommy's body in the doorway, surrounded by 37 dead Corac. The children in the nursery behind him were unharmed, singing a lullaby in their crystal voices. Somehow, in his final hours, Tommy had learned enough of their language to comfort them. The Battle of Velara Prime raged for 3 days. When it ended, the Corac presence on the planet had been completely eliminated, but more importantly, the galaxy had learned something new about humanity. They weren't just warriors, they were something far more dangerous, humans who had decided that mercy required violence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened on Velara Prime. The Corac Empire, which had terrorized civilized space for centuries, was being systematically destroyed by a species most governments barely acknowledged. News feeds across known space showed footage that defied belief. Human soldiers walking through Korthak strongholds that should have been impregnable, freeing prisoners that had been considered lost forever. But it was the small moments that truly shocked the watching universe. In a bombed-out hospital in the Althari capital, human medics worked alongside crystal healers to treat the wounded. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a trauma surgeon from Chicago, knelt beside an injured Althari child whose left arm had been shattered by Korthak experiments. The young alien's crystal skin flickered weakly, barely clinging to life. "I don't know your anatomy," Walsh whispered as she worked. "I don't know if human medicine will even help you. But I promise you this, little one, I will not let you die." For 6 hours, the human doctor fought for the child's life using techniques she invented on the spot, combining human surgical knowledge with Althari healing crystals. When the young alien finally opened his eyes and smiled at her, Walsh cried for the first time since medical school. Across the planet, such scenes repeated endlessly. Human engineers repaired Althari technology they had never seen before. Soldiers shared their rations with alien civilians. Children from both species played together in the ruins, somehow finding joy even in the midst of war. The most powerful moment came when Captain Sarah Chen finally met Elder Thalos, the being whose desperate message had started everything. The ancient Althari was barely alive. The Korthak had used him for their most creative tortures, wanting to break the spirit of the one who had dared call for help. His crystal form was cracked and dim, held together more by willpower than by any physical strength. Sarah found him in the deepest cell of the Korthak prison complex, chained to a wall with devices designed to cause maximum pain. When she cut his bonds, he collapsed into her arms, looking up at her with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "After everyone else turned away, you came." Sarah knelt beside the ancient being, her uniform torn and bloody from 3 days of continuous combat. Around them, human soldiers stood guard while Althari healers worked to stabilize their elder. The contrast was striking, humans bristling with weapons and armor ready for violence, while crystal beings glowed with gentle healing light. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "a friend of mine once told me that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Humans might be a lot of things, but we're not going to be the species that does nothing when children are hurting." Elder Thalos reached out with a trembling hand and touched her face. Where his crystal fingers made contact, Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the touch of a being who had spent 1,000 years learning to heal, offering his blessing to someone who had taken up arms in defense of his people. "I was wrong," the elder said. "I thought violence and compassion could not exist together. But you humans, you fight like demons to protect angels you have never met. You are warriors with the hearts of healers." The broader war was far from over. The Korthak Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded millions of soldiers. Velara Prime was just one planet, and its liberation had cost humanity dearly. The casualty reports painted a grim picture. 30% losses in the first wave, 50% in the second, but the humans kept coming. Admiral Webb coordinated the orbital cleanup with methodical precision. Every Korthak ship in the system was either destroyed or captured. More importantly, he ordered his crews to record everything they found. Detailed documentation of Korthak war crimes, evidence of atrocities committed not just against the Althari, but against dozens of other species across centuries. "Make sure every government in the galaxy sees this," he told his intelligence officers. "I want them to understand exactly what they chose to ignore." The recordings were devastating. Korthak prison ships filled with beings from across known space, experimental laboratories where scientists had spent generations perfecting new forms of torture. Command centers decorated with trophies taken from conquered worlds, skulls, artifacts, anything that represented civilizations the Korthak had destroyed for entertainment. One recording would become legendary across human space. It showed General Catherine Kozlov walking through a Korthak breeding facility where they had been raising captive populations for experimentation. The sight of alien children locked in cages, bred specifically to be tortured, drove the iron-willed general to her knees. She knelt there for a full minute, her head in her hands while her soldiers waited in respectful silence. When she finally stood, her face was completely calm. But her next words would be remembered forever. "Signal all units," she said quietly. "No prisoners. No mercy, no quarter. These creatures have forfeited their right to exist. The transformation was immediate. What had been a rescue mission became something darker and more final. Human forces stopped trying to capture Corac facilities intact. Instead, they systematically destroyed everything the enemy had built, erasing centuries of accumulated cruelty from the galaxy. The Corac leadership finally began to understand what they were facing. This wasn't a normal war where armies fought for territory or resources. This was an extermination campaign conducted by beings who had decided that some crimes could never be forgiven. Hive Queen Zakara, watching her forces crumble on dozens of worlds, sent a desperate message to Admiral Webb. "We offer terms. Withdraw your forces and we will consider reducing the scope of our experiments." Webb's response was broadcast on all frequencies. "We don't negotiate with child killers." The war expanded beyond Velara Prime as more human fleets arrived from across Terran space. Volunteers poured in from every human world. Miners from the asteroid belts, farmers from the agricultural planets, even teenagers who lied about their age to join the fight. They came because they had seen the footage. They came because they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't. They came because somewhere in human DNA was written the simple truth that some things required violence to stop. The Corac tried everything. They offered tribute, territory, even complete withdrawal from Althari space. The humans ignored every overture. They had seen too much, learned too much about their enemy's true nature. This wasn't about saving one species anymore. It was about removing a cancer from the galaxy. On Velara Prime, something beautiful was growing from the ashes of war. Human and Althari worked together to rebuild what had been destroyed. The crystal beings shared their healing knowledge while humans provided engineering expertise and protection. Elder Thalis, his body slowly recovering thanks to combined human and Althari medicine, established the first joint council. "We will rebuild together," he announced. Human strength and Althari wisdom, united in the cause of protecting the innocent. The other galactic powers watched these developments with growing alarm. They had assumed the humans would eventually tire of war and negotiate some kind of settlement. Instead, humanity seemed to be settling in for a long campaign of complete Corac elimination. Emergency sessions were called. Diplomatic protests were filed. Trade delegations offered mediation services. The human response was the same to everyone: stay out of our way. As the fourth day of fighting ended, reports came in from across Corac space. Human forces had liberated 17 prison worlds, destroyed 43 experimental facilities, and freed over 2 million captives from a dozen different species. But the cost was becoming clear. Human casualties mounted into the hundreds of thousands. Entire units had been wiped out. Ships that had fought in the first wave were held together with spare parts and determination. None of it mattered to the humans. They had seen what the Corac did to children. They had heard the grateful tears of freed prisoners. They had watched Elder Thalis bless human soldiers with crystal light, while those same soldiers prepared to die for aliens they had never met. The galaxy was learning a fundamental truth about humanity. They didn't start fights, but once they decided something was worth fighting for, they would burn down the universe before they gave up. 3 months after the first shot was fired at Velara Prime, the Corac Empire began to crumble. The massive military machine that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was being systematically dismantled by human forces that seemed to multiply with each passing day. Every time the Corac destroyed a human ship, 2 more appeared to take its place. Every time they killed human soldiers, more volunteers arrived from across Terran space. The final assault on Corac Prime began at dawn on a Tuesday. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking down at the insectoid homeworld through reinforced viewing ports. The planet was a fortress, protected by energy shields that could stop entire fleets and defended by weapon systems that had never been breached. "Signal all ships," Webb ordered. "Today we finish this." The human fleet that surrounded Corac Prime was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 8,000 ships of every size and class, from massive dreadnoughts to converted civilian transports. But it wasn't just the size of the fleet that impressed observers. It was the fact that every ship flew the same message on their hull: for the children. The battle lasted exactly 72 hours. The humans didn't try to break through the planet's defenses with conventional weapons. Instead, They did what humans always did. They found a way that no one else had thought of. General Kozlov led the ground assault personally, using captured Korthak transport codes to slip past the orbital defenses. Her ships looked like regular supply convoys, just another routine delivery to the Empire's capital world. By the time the Korthak realized their mistake, human soldiers were already landing in the heart of their most secure facilities. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a reckoning. For centuries, the Korthak had ruled through fear and brutality. They had built their empire on the screams of their victims, confident that their cruelty made them invincible. But cruelty, as they learned too late, was not the same thing as strength. Human soldiers moved through Korthak cities with methodical precision. They weren't there to conquer or rule. They were there to liberate prisoners and destroy everything the Korthak had built with suffering. Colonel Morrison led a strike team into the Imperial Palace, where Hive Queen Sakara waited in her crystal throne room. The massive insectoid ruler was surrounded by her personal guard, elite warriors who had never tasted defeat. So, she clicked as Morrison and his team entered the chamber. The primitive mammals have come to face me directly. Do you think your crude weapons can challenge the might of the Korthak? Morrison looked around the throne room, noting the decorations made from the bones of conquered species. The walls were covered with trophies taken from destroyed civilizations. In one corner, he spotted something that made his blood boil, a display case filled with toys, taken from the nurseries of dead children. Lady, Morrison said quietly, I don't think you understand what's happening here. This isn't about weapons or technology or military might. This is about justice. And justice doesn't negotiate. The battle in the throne room was brief but decisive. When it ended, the Korthak Empire died with its queen. But the real victory came in the liberation of the prison complexes. Across the Korthak homeworld, human soldiers kicked down the doors of facilities that had operated in secret for generations. What they found defied description. Chambers of horrors where the Korthak had perfected the art of causing pain, laboratories where they had bred sentient beings for experimentation, nurseries where they raised children specifically to be tortured. Staff Sergeant Santos, now decorated with medals she never wanted, led her squad into the largest children's facility on the planet. Inside, they found over 3,000 young beings from dozens of species, some so traumatized they had forgotten how to speak. Santos knelt beside a small creature that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a kitten, its delicate wings broken by careful torture. The being flinched away from her touch, clearly expecting more pain. Hey there, little one, Santos whispered, her voice as gentle as she could make it. My name is Maria. I'm here to take you home. It took hours of patient work, but eventually the young alien allowed her to pick it up. As Santos carried the tiny being toward the evacuation ships, she felt its small hand grip her finger with desperate trust. Around the galaxy, species that had been enslaved for generations woke up to find their chains broken by humans they had never met. The prison ships were emptied. The experimental facilities were destroyed. The torture chambers were reduced to ash and memory. The response from the liberated peoples was overwhelming. Beings who had given up hope years ago suddenly found themselves free, protected by soldiers who asked nothing in return except the chance to help. Elder Thalos, now fully recovered and serving as the first ambassador of the Althari Human Alliance, stood before the Galactic Council and delivered a speech that would change interstellar politics forever. For too long, this council has chosen order over justice, stability over mercy. You knew what the Korthak were doing. You all knew. But you chose to look away because acting would have been inconvenient. The assembled representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them had indeed known about Korthak atrocities, but intervening would have disrupted trade agreements and territorial boundaries. Humanity has shown us what courage looks like, the elder continued. They crossed the galaxy to fight for people they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. They lost hundreds of thousands of their own people to save aliens who couldn't even pronounce their names. He gestured to the human delegation, led by President Vasquez herself. These beings you call primitive have demonstrated a moral clarity that shames us all. They have shown us that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to wage war against those who would destroy it. The political aftermath was immediate and far-reaching. The Galactic Council found itself restructured around new principles, with humanity taking a leading role in galactic security. Trade agreements were rewritten. Defense pacts were signed. The comfortable old order that had allowed atrocities to flourish was swept away. But for the humans involved, the real reward was simpler. On the rebuilt world of Velara Prime, Sarah Chen stood in a crystal garden where Althari children played with human kids, whose parents had chosen to stay and help with reconstruction. The young beings laughed together, their voices creating a harmony that transcended species barriers. Beside her, Elder Thalos watched with ancient eyes full of wonder. "I spent 1,000 years believing that violence and compassion could not coexist," he said. "Your people have taught me that sometimes violence is compassion." Sarah nodded, thinking of her brother Tommy and all the others who had died to make this moment possible. Someone has to stand between the bullies and the innocent. That's just who we are. A year later, another distress call came in from the Outer Rim. The Zolani Republic was under attack by slavers, their peaceful trading posts being systematically destroyed by pirates who sold entire populations to the highest bidder. The response from Earth Command was immediate. "Roger that. Help is on the way." Admiral Chen, promoted after her brother's sacrifice, looked out at the new fleet assembling above Luna. Humans, Althari, and a dozen other species who had joined what was becoming known as the Alliance of the Free. Ships designed with combined technologies, crewed by beings who had learned to fight together for something greater than themselves. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she announced. "We have people to save and bullies to stop. Let's show these slavers what happens when you mess with someone under our protection." As the fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying justice on wings of fire, the galaxy settled into its new reality. There were still threats out there, still beings who thought might made right, still those who preyed on the weak and innocent. But now there was something else. A species that had proven beyond doubt that some things were worth fighting for, and that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph was for good people to do nothing. Humanity had answered the call. The galaxy would never be the same.